All right. So good evening, everyone. As folks continue to enter the webinar, it's 6 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to our third anniversary webinar, a celebration of the day our organization, Field Inclusive, was founded. My name is Murry Burgess. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an assistant professor in the Wildlife, Fisheries, and Aquaculture Department at Mississippi State University. I'm also a children's author of Sparrow Loves Birds. I am also the CEO and co-founder of Field Inclusive. And just so you are aware, this webinar will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel, so be sure to follow us there for easy access to these recordings again. Also, those who stay for the entirety of the webinar will be entered in our giveaway for a chance to win signed copy of Dr. Finney's book, Black Faces, White Spaces. 2 copies are available and the winners will be announced at the end. Shortly, I will introduce our guest, but first I would like to give a huge thanks to our sponsors for tonight's event, the Sierra Club Foundation, Tangled Bank Conservation, and the Land at Hawkins Loop. It is with the help from organizations like yours that we will able to put on these educational and informational webinars and conservations as we continue our mission in amplifying and supporting more inclusive outdoor experiences for all. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Carolyn Finney. Dr. Carolyn Finney is a storyteller, cultural geographer, and author whose work reimagines the relationship between race, land, and the environment. Her book, Black Faces, White Spaces, is a cornerstone in environmental studies and racial equity, and her essays appear in the New York Times, The Guardian, and A Darker Wilderness. With experience spanning academia, the U.S. National Parks Advisory Board, and her current role as a scholar and artist in residence at Middlebury College, Dr. Finney bridges scholarship, art, and activism to illuminate how identity and belonging shape our connections to nature. Today's webinar will be a conversation moderated by myself with time for both pre-submitted and live audience questions. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Dr. Carolyn Finney. How are you tonight?
Clapping my hands. Happy.
Yes, we are so happy to have you. And as I told you earlier, I have your book. It's one of my favorites. It's all tabbed and highlighted. So I am excited to be in conversation with you tonight. And just to get started, wanting to get a little bit of background on what was the spark that led you to write Black Faces, White Spaces?
Oh my God, the spark. Was it a spark or was it a bonfire?
Right.
Let's see. It probably wasn't just, it wasn't just one thing that led me to write it. I mean, like most of us, right, my life hasn't been linear. And I often talk about growing up on an estate for 50 years, that growing up on an estate that my parents cared for 50 years, that wasn't their land. And about the time I was working on my doctorate, and I dropped out of school years ago. I pursued an acting career for 11 years. I spent 5 years backpacking around the world, living in Nepal. I went back to school to get 3 degrees: undergrad, master's, and doctorate. By the time I hit the doctorate, I was focused on issues having to do with environment and gender, in particular in Nepal. At that moment in the early 2000s was also when my parents had to leave the land that had been home for me forever. So there was this really personal thing going on, that they had to leave that home because they didn't own that land, and the people who originally owned it died. They sold it to someone else, and then they passed away. And I was thinking about ideas of home, but it was being in grad school, and I loved my program at Clark University. It was fabulous for geography. Loved it. I was the only African American in the program. It's neither good nor bad. It's just true. And I started thinking about, I've been looking at environmental issues and gender issues abroad, but I started becoming really interested in gender and race issues at home. I mean, I'm sorry, not gender and race, environment and race issues at home. And a lot of the courses I was taking around conservation, looking at environmental justice, all these ideas and the history of it, particularly in the US, I couldn't find pretty much anything about Black people in the environment in the library.
Right.
Except if we were talking about very, very specifically environmental justice. And while environmental justice for me is really important, what was really challenging for me was that what I always say to people were not only the bad things that happened to us. So while there were memoirs and biologists and other people talking about nature in various forms, in various ways, I couldn't find anything about Black people, African Americans, and their
Mhm.
experience of that. And so that was kind of the bonfire, right? It was frustrating because it meant I wasn't seeing myself
Right.
in the
Right.
work. It meant that I wasn't seeing my family in the work and the experience. When I think about environmental history and what do we mean by that? We were having conversations about conservation and sustainability. Sustaining what is what I always ask. What are we
Mhm.
actually trying to sustain? And what does it mean when we have groups of people who become invisible in that conversation? Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's just habit.
Right.
Meaning it's not, I don't always say people are so bad and evil and they left us out on purpose. Sometimes they did.
Sometimes they
But
did.
right, yeah. I mean, slavery happened. Um,
Yes.
and also sometimes it just becomes this habit, the way privilege can operate, that somehow there's only one way to understand that relationship between human beings and non-human nature here in the US. We talk about it in a very specific way. Um,
Mhm.
and what happens when you're not getting, and I'm just talking about Black people, but this could be any group of
Right.
people, right? I just happen to be talking about African Americans.
Mhm.
So I wanted to tell that story. But the other thing I want to say, not but, and the other
Yes.
thing I want to
And.
say about the way that I wrote it, which is also where I got some of the pushback in academia
Mhm.
about it when it came out and as I was writing it. You know, I make references to people like Spike Lee and artists and not everybody in there that I reference is a scientist and or an academic, even though I reference a ton of them as well. I
Mhm.
see them all equally in terms of their contributions to ways of understanding the African American slash nature relationship in the United States. And also, I had to look other places for that African American knowledge. The reality is, just because it wasn't existing on the academic shelves didn't mean it didn't exist. And
Right.
I found that,
Exactly.
you know, people wrote about it in music, in memoirs, in diaries,
Mhm.
in the art that they were making. And so that's why I wanted to reference that too. So also the practice was how to integrate the different ways we understand and think about and talk about and hold the knowledge relating to the environment. And one is not better than the other. And I'm going to say that one more time. One way of knowing is not better than the other. It's just another way of knowing. And I wanted to be good at kind of bringing all of that in because African Americans collectively and historically have found different ways of showing up in the world, right? And being creative about that,
Right.
right? And
Right.
holding that knowledge. And it's not always about it's great for those of us that have the privilege of having academic degrees, but a very small percentage of people have an academic degree, but it doesn't mean that they don't know something, often know more, you know, have a storage of knowledge passed down to them about the land, about the forest, about the oceans, about this
Right.
that they call home. So,
Right.
yeah,
And all of those types of representation really matters. To see
yeah,
yourself doing something, engaging with something makes all the difference and thinking that, oh, I could maybe do this too.
yes,
And so, and that's a huge theme in the book. And thinking about the book having been written over 10 years ago now,
yeah.
have you seen any changes from when you first started researching and writing versus
Ooh,
today? Positive or negative?
well, yes, I have, Murray. I have Dr. Murray. uh, I want to sort of take it out of the binary, though, of the
Mhm,
negative or positive, because
mhm.
in many ways that's a matter of perspective where you stand.
Right.
Part of the one of the changes that I've seen is at the time in the early 2000s, the late 2000s, when I was working on this, you know, when it went from becoming a dissertation to thinking about it as a book, um, there wasn't a lot of academic information and people writing about it. There weren't classes. I did 3 different degrees. I never had an African American professor. I did an exchange program at the University of Minnesota very briefly, and there was, I believe he was Ethiopian. You know, for a
Mhm.
minute, I had visited the University of Minnesota and we did that class for a minute, but there was no African American studies classes anywhere that I went. I went to 3 different universities in the country, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so forget it when you're talking about that and environment, and then you connect environment or
Right.
conservation with that, right? In terms of my own experience. I love how many books, stories, um, films, ways in which people are engaging that conversation. And in part, I think that happened
Mm-hmm.
because of the murder of George Floyd in 2020. And
Yes.
really within that 36 hours, Christian Cooper having his skin weaponized against him in Central Park. It was because even when George Floyd was murdered,
Mm-hmm.
the Guardian and Christian Cooper had his skin weaponized against him as a person who identifies as black and gay, right?
Yes.
I got a call from the Guardian, and remember this was during COVID, right? So we're all at home, we're all somewhere where we feel like we can't go anywhere, and they said, "Would you write a piece about African Americans in relation to George Floyd?" And I
Mm-hmm.
actually, oh no, they said, can you write a piece about Christian Cooper and the
Mm-hmm.
environmental piece? And I said, the only way I can write about this is that you have to understand that the experience of George Floyd and the experience of Christian Cooper are on a continuum for many
Yes.
African Americans. At one end of
Mm-hmm.
that, at one end of that continuum, you could die. On
Yes.
the other end of that continuum, you're just made all aware all the time of your difference. And in this case, we're talking about skin color, but it isn't the only way that we show up since we all hold
Mm-hmm.
multitudes. But I understand that's what we're emphasizing in this conversation. And so I watched not just for myself, but other Black and Brown people I know who do this work in multiple ways. The doors flew open. It was not just academic articles, it was writing articles anywhere. It was publishing houses wanted all of a sudden the stories of Black people, the filmmakers, documentary filmmakers. It was um, nonprofits, botanical gardens, museums. I mean, we were
Yes.
all, there was a few of us that were calling each other going, what? You know, I said, get ready to swim, y'all, because here comes the tide. Let's ride
Yes.
the tide, right? So I saw that change happen, and we can have a conversation how it shifted again.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the last year and a half, 2 years, that tide has gone back,
Right.
right? And we're watching that happen too. Um, so what has excites me and all the clubs that have popped up and all the organizations, brown girl fishing,
Yes.
black girl hiking, everybody's doing everything because everybody's always done everything, which is the point
Exactly.
I was always trying to make. It's like we've always done everything because we're human, right? And we're out there in the
Exactly.
world. Even if you can't see us, even if you don't know how to see us, we have
Mm-hmm.
always been there, right? So
Yes.
I
Yes.
can keep going, so you have to stop me.
It's
I
no,
had some
I
caffeine
love
right
this.
before I got on. Yes. Woo,
And
keep
no, I love that sentiment about we have always been there because
yes.
we have, whether or
Yes.
not we've been acknowledged or not.
Yes.
And I imagine, and you speak on it in your book too, a bit of that kind of fatigue about having to explain ourselves all the time and saying like
Yes.
environmentalism isn't just for white people and things
Yes.
like that.
Yes.
And I'm just, how has that come across to you, even as the author of the book and all of the work that you do?
You mean the fatigue? You mean
Yes,
that?
the
Yeah.
fatigue, having dealt with
So
that.
if you had asked me this like 3 years ago, right? I
Mhm.
was in the throes of, during the COVID moment, there was maybe a 2 year period. I counted it once. I think I spoke at like 235. I mean, speaking, writing, consulting,
Wow.
facilitating, it was nonstop. And
Mhm.
I it's important for me to say that I was incredibly grateful for that because it also meant,
Yes.
I'm getting income, I'm getting supported doing the work that I love. What wow, that is a great gift because I love working in the best context of being creative and generative and engaged
Mhm.
and being able to show up as your whole self. And
Right.
also, I used to say in a lot of talks, I always like to start off honestly where I'm at in that moment, and I would say that I'm exhausted. Like
Yes.
the way in which
Understandable.
exhausting because part of what I believe in is a kind of radical vulnerability. Part of what I
Mhm.
believe in is meeting people where they are, regardless of how they identify and who they are,
Mhm.
and understanding in terms in this is just what I believe in terms of my own experience, and understanding that we're up against 400 years
Mhm.
of shifting, trying to get a perspective in there to some folks who have never had to think about it, right? which doesn't
Right.
make them bad people, but this is what,
Mhm.
privilege has the privilege of not seeing itself. Haven't had to think about it. That with
Mhm.
all good intentions in place of thinking about conservation, thinking about that nature outside of ourselves, thinking about who we are in relation to that nature and how we should be, forming national parks, coming up with the Forest Service,
Yes.
Bureau of Land Management. I mean, what it shows me, we can be critical about every organization. And I think there's a room for that as long as it's helpful. The intention is something
Yes.
different. At the core of that is, I want to say, an element of love, an element of care and concern about that
Mhm.
environment. Now, I'm not naive, and I understand because under capitalism, we often think about that nature outside of ourselves as a supermarket of resources for our use. So, it becomes about how do we consume it, and we can have that
Mhm.
conversation, and I find that highly problematic. We talk about indigenous knowledge as though it's something else that we can extract and transact and use as we
Right.
will, as
Right.
opposed to recognizing it is part of a history of a people. Um,
Mhm.
that we can collaborate with and learn from and understand, but it is not ours
Right.
to take. And as
Right.
Black people, it becomes particularly complicated because we were brought here against our will, most of
Right.
us, our
Mhm.
ancestors, to work a land for free as someone else's property. And
Mhm.
that's complicated, right? In terms,
Exactly.
doesn't mean we didn't come to know that land, doesn't mean we didn't come to love it even, you know.
Mhm.
But our relationship to it is a little
It's
different than
different.
the
Yes.
indigenous community broadly defined here in the US, the European immigrant community. We could go on down the line, like all the different ways we sort of come together at this moment. And I think conservation historically has been resistant to thinking about that complexity.
Yes.
Right? And you
Yeah.
see how gentle I'm being because I'm trying to be.
Hey, and you don't have to be that gentle here. It's like
Oh,
we,
part of,
you know.
part of it is because we're in a different moment now. And
Yes,
if I'm
we
and if
are.
I'm going to tell the truth, and I always like to tell the truth, it is watching the ways within which we are being silenced, the experience,
Yes.
not just of Black people, but because I'm here talking about African Americans in particular, how
Mhm.
that history is being changed, is being erased, is being dismissed and ignored. This is an old story told in a new way.
Yes, it is.
And how do you, we thought we did the work. We thought we said some things in 2020 and 2021. We thought we were tired then. And
Mhm.
now
And now
it's like
gotta
we
work
were in a
even
whole
harder.
mess. Well, the thing, if you would ask me this even 4 months ago, I got
Mhm.
pretty depressed about the whole thing. I mean, to be
Mhm.
honest with you, people were taking my book off the shelves. It was being removed from some places.
Right.
Uh, I work with a lot of different groups, including some of government agencies and public institutions, and their ability to bring me in was challenged. And now, what I've always said to people, we have to be willing to take a risk in order to gain. This is the
Yes.
real, we thought, people who thought the real fight was a few years ago, oh no, that was not the real. I mean, there was a fight
Yes.
about this, that we're here
There
now
was right.
because the minute it costs you something, and it always costs you something,
It
right?
always costs something.
Right.
Yes.
And so this conversation, we're watching it around climate change,
Yeah.
you know. So anything having to do with the environment, let alone the different communities and individuals, like many of us here on this webinar tonight. So
Mhm.
I'm still tired, but
Yes.
I've had to take some time to really think about. Uh, I'm not going away.
Exactly.
Right. And I was telling someone, so last week I was speaking at a event in Artemis, Pennsylvania. It's called Camp
Mhm.
Out Honcho, and it's an LGBTQ event of like 3,000 people. They do their, I was told it was called the Queer Burning Man. They're in
Mhm.
the woods camping. And they brought me in to be in conversation with a Black trans woman who also loves nature and has written about, we both had essays in a similar book. And um, I forgot what I was going to say. I think one of the things that I was going somewhere with that because I was thinking, well, I was thinking one, that, anybody who invites me in, I'm going.
Yes.
One, as long as I can do it. That's what I was going to say. There was a young,
Mhm.
he identified as a queer Palestinian American man who
Mhm.
asked me very emotionally in tears. Part of his ask was, with everything happening to his people in Gaza, he said,
Mhm.
how am I, and I'm here and I'm well and I'm doing this thing. I don't even know. What can I do to help? What can I do? And I said, what you can do and what we can all do. Sometimes if we have money to give, that's great. If we can actually show up in person, but the importance of witnessing and remembering.
Yes.
And so part of what I had to remember for myself in this moment, thinking about the environment, thinking about African Americans, thinking about anybody, but
Mhm.
this conversation
Yeah.
is, what is my role in witnessing and remembering? I'm privileged enough to be able to get paid to talk about this, to write about this, to show up
Mhm.
and facilitate around this. So that's exactly what I'm going to do and say these
Yes.
things over and over. It is not about me being tired. And I'm not saying that self-care isn't important. It is.
Right. Right.
And I might have given it all 3 years ago. Well, as long as I'm alive, I believe I have to give it all because I'm part of this larger society. And I am
Mhm.
not going to allow anyone to simply silence me. I'm just not.
Exactly.
My,
Exactly.
my ancestors are going to kick my butt. I don't know about you, but they're looking at me. See them on the wall back here?
Yes. It's like it's our responsibility to keep having these conversations, to keep showing
Yes.
up in any capacity that we can. And I
Yes.
know there's been all of these outdoor organizations and nonprofits and clubs that have sprung up doing absolutely amazing work working towards
Yes.
diversity and inclusion in these recent years.
Yeah.
So out of all of that work and just like acknowledging how amazing it has been, have you seen any like tangible progress that has been made and any gaps that just glaringly remain in the work that needs to be done?
Well, this is always, it's a great question, Dr. Murray. I like to just call you Dr. Murray. Can I do?
Thank you.
Uh, is going to be based on my own bias, and because I haven't seen everything. I'm out there a lot, but
Mhm.
I haven't seen everything. Um, um, Progress. Well, one of the things I've already said, right, that there are more and more organizations, and there's more acknowledgement, I want to say, from predominantly white environmental organizations.
Mhm.
I worked with so many, and what I can really appreciate by a lot of these organizations is the way within which they're rethinking their own
Mhm.
stance, their own mission statement, who they are, and how it is they do what they do. Their
Mhm.
practice of conservation, their practice of sustainability, how do they do that differently as it relates to having different people and different histories and different knowledges in the room. And it matters what room that is, right? It's not only
Yes.
about inviting people into the room. So I see that progress. I see that
Mhm.
progress. I can think about how my father, after coming back from the Korean War in the 50s, said he saw a park ranger uniform in
Yes.
Virginia, and they couldn't hire a black person in the 50s, and they told him, we don't hire Negroes. And then
Mhm.
how many years later, his daughter serves on the National Parks Advisory Board for 8 years under Obama. That sometimes you have to have a long view. Sometimes it's just,
Yes.
but I can see it in my own lifetime. It's like, oh yeah, we definitely have come down the road. Um, I, the gaps thing is always because of, well, we're not in a gap. We're in a chasm right now.
Yes, this is definitely a major example of
Well,
right now.
and it's the biggest one, right? That people would have said, how did we get back here? And I would
Mhm.
say it's because we never left, which doesn't mean that we
Mm.
haven't moved forward. I believe that if we, again, it costs something, but there's something about accountability to a history that we're all collectively related to. We don't all
Yeah.
stand in the same place in relation to that history, but it happened. And we are all here, and it is in our collective DNA.
Yes,
Uh,
yes, it is.
Number one, all this land was stolen. I'm looking right
Mhm.
at the camera when I say it.
Yes.
you know, we took another group of people, made them our property to build the backbone, the economic backbone of this country, and they worked the land for
Mhm.
free. And then there's all the other people who came after, from the Chinese working the railroad, who we then treated poorly, over
Mhm.
3,000 of them, to the Mexican immigrants who come across the border, the people from South Asia. The Japanese immigrants that we interned, we continue to do that. It's a repeating, it's a repeating, it's a repeating, it's a repeating.
Yes.
So in my better moment, and I'm having a better moment right now, I would say this is yet another opportunity for us to look in the mirror and reflect on who we
Mhm.
are as well as who it is we want to be. Um, and on a better day, when I'm hearing this louder noise telling us we're, all these things we can't say and do, all the words we have to flag, all the ways we can't speak, the thing that I'm really hearing is somebody is afraid.
Mhm.
And because I refuse to relinquish my humanity to anybody, I can dig way down there and say, I feel for you, my brother or sister.
Yes. Yes.
And also, that cannot be what stops me or anybody or the idea. They can't stop time.
Mhm.
No one's going to forget. Um, all we can do is fall into that chasm and fumble around and do some more fumbling around and waste our time fumbling around, and people get hurt and people die and we lose a sense of who we are. We waste time. I think that's the thing that upsets me most. We waste time
Yes.
thinking that we can, I don't know. Well, I do know, but so let me just say, you're asking me what the negative is. I think the negative isn't, I want to take it from the binary again, not good, not
Mhm.
bad. It is a moment that is incredibly difficult and is costing a lot of people a lot. It is costing a lot of non-human nature a lot.
Yes. Yes.
And I have been doing some soul searching and thinking just about myself personally, just to go,
Mhm.
so what is this asking of me in this moment?
Yes.
And I know that people, as an African American, the references to people like Harriet Tubman, there's a reason why we reference Harriet Tubman.
Mhm.
600, over 600 lives. I, when I think about, like, she had to make that choice over and over, and do you think that she wasn't tired? Do you think that she
Absolutely.
wasn't afraid?
Absolutely.
Do you think, I mean, so what does that look like for any of us today? And I can't speak for anybody else, but for myself, in a
Yes.
position where my parents, the only opportunity they had was to work somebody else's land for 50 years and chauffeur their car and clean their house. And they did it well. And because they grew up on that land, they adopted me and I got to have that experience of that. But
Mhm.
look at me. I get to go all over the world and people invite me in because it is about this is liberation, right? And this is freedom. And what I
Absolutely.
understand is how we um oh, what do I want to say? I can tell I'm getting too worked up. My God.
No, this okay, I love the passion so
Yeah,
much. And going off of something that you just said that made me
yeah,
think, a lot of like, African Americans don't like have access to like their own properties or their own lands.
yeah.
And so just wondering what would you say to somebody who would be like, well, I don't really care about the environment, it's not mine type of thing.
Right.
Like,
And
mhm,
I would be so, I welcome that question and I would back it up and turn it around. I've never owned any land. My family's never
mhm,
owned any land. I have nothing. I have no land that's mine.
mhm,
And I live on this earth and I live in this place. And we the people, I have a right to be here because I am
yes.
here. Because whatever it is that you believe, God, the greater spirit, whatever it is, decided the magic, the mystery that I was going to be here at this time.
Mhm,
So my responsibility and accountability is to exactly where I am. Now, the question of access is a very much a smaller, in some ways, human question. And what I mean is, sometimes I think we operate, the whole private land, public land, where we can go. People can decide who can come in because some people own it, and all of that happens, right? And all that is happening still. And in an ideal world, everybody would get to go everywhere they wanted at any time they wanted to go.
Mhm.
And there's something to be said for that we can love exactly where we are. One of the reasons I love the city, for me, if I could still be living in New York City, I would still be there. I love living in cities. And when people
Mhm.
say, oh, but nature, but you need to get out to the thing, I was like, do you think there's no nature here in the city? Like, what do you?
Right. There's nature everywhere.
There's nature everywhere. And that translates as often money isn't given to care for that local park on the corner or the trees lining the streets. There is, the care needed for that nature isn't there. And I always say when city governments, when governments don't care for those places, it's also a message to the people that you don't care for those people. So
Right.
when you say it's not mine, and then I would say I would want to turn that around and say, well, what is yours? What feels like yours? What do you own in here?
Mhm.
Right? We're brought up again in a capitalist system and we think we have to own it for it to belong to us. And I would say nothing belongs to you and you belong to everything. So it becomes a choice that only you can make and nobody can take that choice away from you to say, I'm right here. There's a wonderful black I think he calls himself a gardener, Ron Finley, out in LA.
Mhm.
He's known as oh God, somebody help me. He's got a great name. He gardens wherever he can on highway medians. Uh,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
he's amazing, right?
Mhm.
He wouldn't look at, he didn't wait till somebody gave him some land and said, here, this is
Right.
yours, you can garden. Um, you know, and when I've met people, I have never met him, I read about him, but people I've
Mhm.
met like him or read about is a reminder to me I'm not trying to fit into somebody else's idea of what it means to care about that environment, what it means to show up in it.
Mhm.
I can actually create that for myself, exactly where I'm at. I can build my knowledge base. There's peoples I can talk to. I don't actually have to go to college to do it. And I'm not saying to people
Right.
out there I'm saying my parents have a high school education and they knew
Mhm.
more about that land than the owners who owned it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Um, yeah. So,
Yes,
you know,
I love that response so much because that's what I try to do with my book Sparrow Loves Birds is like
yeah,
introduce people to common backyard birds that you can see pretty
yes,
much anywhere. You don't have to go to like this far off remote place or like
yeah,
a national park just to go enjoy the nature that's in your own backyard.
yes.
And so
And I want to make sure that people understand it's not a but or,
yes.
or it's not an either or. That's what I want to say.
Mhm.
And if you have the opportunity, I mean, I fell in love with backpacking. I did a backpacking trip around the world. I didn't have it back in the 80s. And after that, then I backpacked through East Africa for 6 months. I saved my money. I didn't have any money. I saved it for 6 months
Awesome.
off. I did it over and over again
Mhm.
because there's something about seeing the world and finding myself in it. And I just fell in love with it. And also so if you have the opportunity, if it's something that you want to do, find a way to do it. It's an
Yes.
either and, right? I can, appreciate the sparrow in my backyard as much as I can appreciate looking at Mount Everest at the foot of it in Nepal.
Yes.
You know, they're both there. Yeah.
Yes, I love that so much. And so I'm going to pause right here and say thank you, thank you, thank you. Right now, we're going to open it up into the Q&A portion of our discussion because I see some of these questions start to roll in, so I want to get to as many of them as possible. And so again, we invite the audience to write questions using the Q&A function, not the chat, but the Q&A. And we will receive questions from our registrants first to make sure we get to everybody. And I'm going to start with this first one up here. An anonymous attendee posted, what would you say to those that want to ignore the past? So not those that want to bury it, but those that say, yes, I agree things need to change, but what's the point in rehashing the past? For example, discussing the problematic aspect of the conservation movement's history.
Yeah. It's a great question. Um, And I've answered questions like this before. Like I've worked with people where it
Mhm,
comes up in different forms, right? Around, the framing that we're somehow rehashing history. Uh,
mhm.
I love Brian Stevenson, the Black lawyer who the what's the movie True Justice with Michael P. What's his name?
Oh my good.
Wakanda. Michael P. Jordan.
Yes, Michael B. Jordan.
Movie. Brian Stevenson created the Legacy Museum in Alabama, where people, it's sort of it's a place where you can go to see and hear about people, Black people who who were hanged, who were lynched,
Mhm,
and it's an opportunity for towns that know they had lynchings to bring soil and have a kind of accountability, a moment of redemption, a possibility of honoring that. Um, it's for me, it's not a rehashing of history. I would argue, and I wouldn't argue. So I'm always thinking practically. If somebody asked me this question and I had to push back, which I have, I would invite them to consider the role that history has in their own lives. And the first thing I would do is talk about it in mine as I see it and
mhm.
understand it. As someone who was adopted, who up until 2 years ago didn't know who I was blood related to, you know,
Mhm.
going back in history is helpful for me to think about where I come from. So those moments where I feel alone, those moments where I feel separate, those moments where I feel not seen. It's a way to say I didn't just get here on my own. There's a long
Mhm.
line of people that were behind me. Um, History is, again, not a rehashing, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity
Yes.
to see mistakes we may have made collectively as human beings, to understand that, you know, sometimes it's about a simple apology. I mean, really. You
Yes.
know, I mean, really, because it's also about building trust. If we are, as a society, all of us holding multitudes of who we are in this country, there are so many of us, we're all so different. What do we have in common? The first thing that we all have in common is our humanity.
Mhm.
Born, we live, we die, right?
Absolutely.
The other thing here in the United States is that we all live here in the United States of America.
Yes.
There's a history, right? There's a history to how this country was founded and how that changed over time. So the rehashing, the revisiting, for me is to look for kernels of truth and knowledge and understanding, and also to build trust with the people I'm alive with here today. If I'm going to be in a solid, trusting relationship and work with people in conservation,
Yeah.
I want to know that they're going to be as fearless as I'm going to try to be to show up to what is going to be incredibly uncomfortable, which is not the same as being unsafe, but is incredibly uncomfortable. And ask any
Yes.
Black or brown person if they've gone a day without feeling uncomfortable somewhere,
Re-
especially in the great outdoors, but also not just Black and brown people. People who identify as women, older people, younger people, we have this, it's all over the place. And if I'm going to build trust with you,
Mhm.
then I'd like for us to be able to look at that together. I tell people it's not so that one person can feel shame. When I'm a human being, I felt shame over choices I've made as an individual trying to get through life. I have not been perfect, but it is not about shame. It is about a moment to see each other's common humanity in that and to offer
Yes.
something. If one
Yes.
in this conversation, if a white person is feeling shame, then I'm able to step up and say that I'm not here to make you feel bad, but I felt bad for
Exactly.
a long time. And so
Mhm.
I want us to be able to stand in that together, because the healing is what's important. The healing
Yes,
is
it
what's
is.
important. That we've come from this history at different places at different times. And now we know that. And now we looked at it together.
Mhm.
And we still decide to show up in this moment. So now when you say to me, our organization really wants to do this work, I believe you.
Yes.
That's why we look
Yes.
at history, right? And so we don't make those same mistakes again. And if we do, because we're human and we often make the same mistakes again, right? We still show up to that. We attend to the impacts of those mistakes. We practice building those muscles in order to do that work. Um, History is who
Yes.
we are,
It is.
right?
And that
Nothing,
segues.
yes, I
Oh,
want
go
to say,
ahead.
and it's not the only thing we are, but it is
Yes.
also part of who we are.
It is. Yes. And I love that piece about shame too, and that shouldn't be the primary emotion we have to feel. That leads perfectly into this next question. What are your thoughts or recommendations on how museums, aquariums, zoos, planetariums, who historically are highly trusted in society, can start to have these talks and conversations and begin that type of inclusive work?
Wow, that's a great question too. And I think some of them are. I think some
Hmm.
of them are. So one of the things I always like to say that an institution is made up of people.
Yes.
So while an institution, brick and mortar, has money behind it, may have, 100 years behind it, it's still made up of people.
Mhm.
And if we can keep that in mind, that's why the relationship piece is so important. How we are in relationship with the people, less so the institution. The institution is there, you know, um, but it's the people within that who hold positions of power, who hold access,
Mhm.
who also belong to communities and families and have believe in certain things and don't believe in other things. I mean, they bring all of that, or they may say they leave it at home, but I'm like, wherever you go, there you are. So you bring in it all the time. And it's the
Yes.
what you understand your, and many of them have trained really hard to get those positions. They've gone to school, they've worked for years, they love what it is they do. If we can remember all of that, right? It's not go in and immediately say, "Oh my God, that museum." My favorite museum is the Museum of Natural History. And when I
Mhm.
wrote the book, it's when I started finding out things that the museum, that the history, some of the ugly history of them putting Oda Banga, a 19-year-old boy, young man from the Congo who was discovered, brought back, and put on display at that museum as representative of the missing link. And then, because they
Yes.
didn't think enough people would see him, they moved him to the Bronx Zoo, to the primate exhibit.
Mhm.
And that was the
Mhm.
Museum of Natural History. And that was the Bronx Zoo, the first zoo I, ever went to. That's hard not to feel a way about that. And also, I can also look at the trajectory over time of what's shifted, how that's changed, and what it must be like to own that, to say, we did that thing.
Mhm.
I think it's actually a really powerful place for an institution to say, we did that thing, and to say it out loud.
Yes. And to make
Then,
sure they don't repeat it again.
but
Yes.
that place of owning it opens the door for trust and
It
relationship
does.
and building possibility to do something different, right? To understand
Yes.
that who was sitting around those board tables making those decisions 40 years ago, it should look different now.
Yes.
It should have looked different then, because this country has always
It
been
should, it should.
have all kinds of people at the table. Um,
Mhm.
so and oh God, well, I guess I want to say, and for those institutions and organizations to retain their relevancy, well, I have to rethink that for a second, because I would say
Mhm.
that I would ask any organization I've talked to, I'd say, what's the intention, or what's the set of intentions
Mhm.
in terms of the work, right?
Yes.
What is the intentions? And I don't think it's like mission statements. When a mission
Mhm.
statement is frozen in time, I become deeply concerned that the mission that a group might have talked about in 1950s and you're still holding the same mission statement.
Yeah, well, then what you doing?
Really? Let's sit down and look at your mission statement.
Yeah.
But I want to say that having worked with many groups that have been around a really long time, and this is something I always
Mhm.
say, you may not have to throw out the baby in the bathwater, but you may need a new bathtub. So
Yes.
I recognize that people that have put a lot of time in, that have helped to build an organization, that have also are have knowledge that they've generated over time. I'm not interested in saying that, well, we've got to cancel them out or dismiss them out.
Mm-hmm.
I actually believe we have the capacity to hold everyone
Yes.
because it is
Yes, we
about
do.
the relationships, right? So I'm not going to do to you what I don't want you to do to me, right? If that makes sense. It's like
Right. Makes sense.
I can practice something different. And I'm
Mhm.
curious to what you've learned over time. And here's what I've learned and what happens when we come together, what emerges. It's what's emerging, right? That's exciting about the moment for any institution, any organization, and any individual that wants to show up differently at this moment and do work pertaining to that nature outside of ourselves, the environment, conservation, whatever you want to call it, and the work
Yes,
of caring for each other as well, not just non-human and more than human species,
exactly.
but ourselves as well.
Exactly. It's going to take everybody working and doing these things. The next question is, how would you respond to any BIPOC folks who say that they don't want to become involved in conservation work or outdoor recreation even because it's considered, for lack of a better term, white people stuff? And this person says, I have worked in the outdoors and conservation work since 2019, and I have had many friends and family ask me this. And while I explain the love for work on my part, the sentiment can become a mental block that
Yeah.
can prevent more BIPOC individuals from pursuing work they care about.
Yes, that's a great question because I've had it happen to me too over the
Yes, me
years.
too. Yes.
Right, right. It's like, oh, people say to me, it's a white people thing.
Hmm.
And I understand the sentiment.
Hmm.
And we just gave it all away. That is power, just gave it all away. Care for the environment is not a white people thing.
Right. It's
Care
not.
for the environment is a human thing, or it should be a human thing, you know, to care about the environment. So the invitation, but I'm not here to, when I was interviewing Black people across the country for Black Faces, White Spaces, I was really careful not to, I wasn't trying to antagonize or blame
Hmm.
or say, what's wrong with you? Come on now. I mean, I might joke around with my family like that, but you
Hmm.
I really wanted to hear what people had to say. So part of it is strategy on how to ask the question. That's why I would say, so tell me, when I say environment to you, what does that mean? When
Yes.
I say nature to you, what does that mean? When I say parks to you, what does that mean? And the amazing thing was how many Black people would say to me, nobody's ever asked me that before. I would say, tell me a story of, when you first kind of, thought about that nature. And some people would say, oh, well, I don't have a story. And I'm like, honey, you breathing. You got a story. And always had a story. And some of the stories were amazing. They would tell us because it's something they hadn't thought of.
Yes.
You know, we all live in a world. When I hear people say that's a white people thing, I understand what the sentiment is. And I also understand where it comes
Hmm.
from a world that has told you that certain things are not for you, right? Not where,
Right.
and man, and when we take that on, we are saying something, not that came from in here, it came from out here, and it's
Yes.
externalized oppression. Somebody told you that, or you didn't see yourself in any movies about it, or any books, or any classrooms, and you're not seeing anybody when you're out on the hiking trail or in the parks, so it must not be for you, and that's not
Hmm.
it. This is why it's also important
Exactly.
to understand history and rehash it, because all you got to do is go back just a little bit and start to understand segregation, to understand redlining, to understand slavery, to understand Jim Crow, to understand all the ways within which we
Mhm.
were kept out of the
Yes.
conversation, of the spaces, away from the opportunities, right? No wonder some of us think it isn't for us.
Exactly. They don't want it to be for us and so much throughout history. But we've been there every single step of the
Of
way.
course we have, because we're human. How could we
Yes.
couldn't survive without it. We couldn't survive without it. Nobody can.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you. Another question is, oh, it has my name in it. What advice or encouragement would you give to young professionals like Murray and Lauren as they develop their young careers in wildlife biology and the environment?
Well, I love it. I love it. First of all, keep on keeping on.
I will, I
I
will.
what I always say, when I went back to school, it wasn't because I wanted to be an academic. I've had my
Mhm,
challenges with academia as an institution because I loved being back in school, but I wanted the freedom to be able to bring my whole self to bear on a topic that was really close to me. And
mhm,
I found that throughout my experience in academia, I wasn't always legible. I wasn't
mhm,
always legible within the academy for a variety of reasons. And sometimes I was made to feel insecure because of it. And this is true regardless how you identify of people in the academy, right? There's
mhm,
great things that I think the academy does. It's given me lots of opportunities. I've learned a lot. And also, I often felt insecure, not good enough, because I did things differently, because I was asking
mhm,
a different set of questions, because I was asking those questions in a different way, because
mhm.
I had a different reason for being there. And what became clear to me is one, because I had a great advisor for my doctorate who said, do what you do and do it well. People may not understand what you do, but if you do it well, they will respect it.
Yes.
Two, is just being honest with yourself about what your intention or your set of intentions are, why you are there. Because I used to say at my first job as a professor, I used to say that I don't work within the rules, I work in relationship to the rules. And I wasn't
Yes.
saying it to be cute, you
Mhm,
know. I was saying it because I was getting swallowed alive within the rules. I was watching everything that I was there to do disappear. All the reasons I went back to school and went deeply in debt to do it disappear. A
mhm,
friend had to say to me, "What is your intention? Why did you go back to school? What are you here to do?" And as soon as it got clear, like as soon as I got clear on that, it didn't mean it wasn't hard sometimes. It doesn't mean that I didn't have to make some sacrifices or different kinds of choices.
mhm.
It just meant that I developed a clarity because it was also about my own integrity. You have,
Yes.
Dr. Murray, have to look in the mirror at the end of the day and be able to see yourself and say, these are the choices I'm making, and this is why I'm making these choices. And in the best of
Mhm.
all possible world, you are supported, you are guided, you are elevated. But sometimes it ain't like that,
Right.
right? Sometimes
Right.
it ain't like that. And what you always have is yourself, that you are clear and always revisiting that about why am I here? What am I doing? What do I love? What do I need? And being
Mhm,
able to ask for what you need. It doesn't mean you'll always get it, but that clarity, that strength, that openness, that you do not close your heart off. And not everyone deserves your truth, but make sure
mhm.
you understand what that truth is
Yes,
so that you are
absolutely.
always upright in that truth doing this work because we need you here. And also, I think you need to be here.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you so much for that. So we've talked a lot about writing the book 10 years ago, kind of where we are in this current
Yeah.
space. So let's jump 10 years into the future. And if you could see one concrete change in how the environmental field operates, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. So the challenge for me in answering this question is, and every people who know me know that I'm always thinking about the complexity.
Hmm.
So there's never one answer to that because there's a lot of things what will have to shift. Um, I mean, where to begin? We are, climate change is real.
Yes.
So, the question of what are we willing to do individually in communities and institutions and organizations in relation to climate change, just
Hmm.
understanding what it is and how we live our lives as a consumer society. What does
Yes.
it mean? So I mean, this may not be where you were asking me to go, but the one thing I'd like to see that we've actually done something about it. And while there's
Hmm.
things happening, I'm kind of concerned because, our mindset around that everything is here for us to use as we need so we can always be comfortable in the way that we understand comfort, right? As
Mhm.
opposed to thinking about the generations to come. And actually, let me step back as someone who doesn't have children, even if we're not thinking about that, to think about that non-human nature out there as a
Yes.
living thing that we should be accountable to and responsible
Mhm.
to. And you don't have to like to wear fleece and go hiking every weekend and be a vegan in order to appreciate it, to
Right.
understand it out there is the reason you're in here, right? And so what I'd really like to see, and I'd like to see that reflected in our organizations and our day-to-day practices, in the words we use, the how we show up in relationship, not just to that nature out there, but to each other. Because
Yes.
our ability to care and to be accountable to each other will be reflected in the way we think of that environment out there, and vice
Mhm.
versa, right? And it's hard to see that right now. I know it's happening
It
in a lot
is.
of places still because it's always been happening, but it feels, and I'm being gentle, very cloudy,
Yes.
and we're even afraid to say the things. So I that's what I would like to see 10
Yes.
years from now.
I hope we do get there, maybe even sooner than 10 years. Who knows? But
Well,
yes,
it's a long game, and people have heard me
it
say that.
is.
I think we're always
Mhm.
playing a long game, and actually,
Yes.
it's about my lifetime.
Mhm.
What do I want to see in my lifetime? You know, I used to say that too, and I'm like, actually, it's not about my lifetime,
Mm.
right? It's about the idea that I'm part of a big, big, big story, and so what am
Yeah,
I doing with the part that I have? What am I doing with
exactly.
the part that I have right now, and how am I present? You know, the future never comes. You understand that,
Yes.
right? We're always present.
Exactly.
We're always in the present. So really, it's kind of funny. It's like kind of messed up. You're like, what do you mean? Whoa, yeah, right. The future never comes.
Never comes.
So how are we present?
Exactly. And that leads me to one final question for you from an audience member. Speaking of your lifetime, so they start by saying, "I've heard you speak several times and have loved learning from you every time. What is next for you? Are you working on another book or a follow-up to the first one?"
Sorry, that was a little took a step there. Um, well, so yes is the short answer. What I
Yes.
want to say is so my residency at Middlebury is part-time on purpose. I'm there only
Mhm,
on Mondays and Tuesdays. I teach one class, and part of the arrangement I'm in the Franklin Environmental Center is that I invite in people virtually or otherwise that I've met around the world, around the country to that's artists and academics and thinkers and all kinds of activists to come in and be in
mhm.
conversation. The rest of the time I have a kind of public, not kind of, I have a public platform. So I work with a lot of different groups all over the place. So I'm traveling a lot.
Yeah.
The last year and a half, 2 years, I'm back in relationship with an international organization called the Global Diversity Foundation, who doesn't work with actually people in the US. They work with people
Mhm,
who work in conservation primarily in Asia, Africa, and other parts of the world outside of primarily Asia and Africa and Central South America. And I help to facilitate conversations. And we'll be in Kenya. There's a really interesting website. I've been working with them for 6 months about the future of conservation. And myself and a young man from India have been interviewing people both from the United States and from around the world, park rangers and philanthropists and others who work in that about that future of conservation. We wrote a long piece for that, which will be published online shortly. There's a couple of documentary film things happening. For those of you who don't know, the story of York, who York was part of the Lewis and Clark expedition. York was an enslaved
mhm,
African who we don't often hear about in the history books. I certainly didn't growing up. I heard about Sacagawea, but not about York.
mhm,
And last summer, there was some money raised to have 8 Black storytellers. I was one of them come to Montana. We spent 4 days canoeing 49
mhm,
miles on the upper Missouri River breaks, which was partly where Lewis and Clark were doing that. It was a 2 year expedition all the way to the Oregon coast to tell the
mhm,
story of York, and a documentary film team. That film is done and it will be premiered in Oregon in October, and it will be out there and around. So there's a lot of projects like this.
mhm.
And the second book I've been working on for a while, it's been the one that I've always wanted to write, actually. It's
Okay.
personal, it's a more personal book about race, land, and memory and belonging. And
Mhm.
so while it's also talking about land and belonging and place and using the sort of story of my life interwoven with other things happening within the larger
Mhm.
context at the time, it was part of that story will be as I met members of my biological family. So I think a lot about the question of DNA and all the ways we think about belonging and who are we in that conversation. Part of that, and I have to confirm this, I'm not going to say that actually because I realize you're taping this, so I'm going to keep that
Yes.
offline. So there's a lot of different projects that I'm really grateful to be working on. I speak at a lot of places, and people ask me in various capacities to do this work, and I'm writing a number of different things, essays and things in between. And so for me, it is how do I continue to be present,
Mhm.
practice. The work for me is not work in the sense of simply doing a job. The work for me is this is what I've always wanted to do is like I can show up as my whole self and do this work in a way and be in relationship with others who are doing this work as well and also pay my rent while I'm doing it. So it is an incredible gift and privilege. It took a minute. It took a minute to get
Yes.
um, and nothing is permanent, right? So
Right.
I remind myself of that too in moments where I just get worried. Um, but then remember, you know,
Yes. Well, I am super excited for both of those, all of your future works. I told you earlier I'm a fangirl, so I will be anticipating those.
yeah.
And well, on behalf of Field Inclusive, we'd like to extend a huge thanks to Dr. Carolyn Finney for joining us today. We are deeply grateful for the work you do and for the generosity with which you share your experiences and your insights. And
Yeah.
before we close, if you wanted to share any final thoughts with our audience, you are welcome to do so.
Oh my gosh, it's always like the final thoughts, and then 3 hours later, she's still talking. I I would just say that I I'm just gonna repeat that I know that this has been a challenging moment for me. If I'd had this conversation with all of you a few months ago, I was really down in the dumps, about
Mhm.
everything and rethinking how do I do this work? How do I show up? Um, who are we as a collective of people?
Yeah.
And what I'm continually reminded of, because now I'm feeling up again, been engaging with people, um, is that for those of us who are feeling sadness and grief and really struggling, that we are supported, that we are um, worthy, that we this too shall pass. It may not pass easily and it may not pass quickly, but time keeps marching forward. That I am so grateful for everybody on this call who is doing the work and for the organizations that made it possible for me to be here. That the thing that's true, and I travel all over, is the people I speak with. There's so much love present. And, part of the conversation with my colleague in India was how do we operationalize that love? Not love is just a woo woo idea, but what
Mhm.
does it look like in practice in the work of conservation, sustainability, relationship between ourselves and that nature outside of ourselves and between each other? And that's what I believe we're here to do, period. And so,
Yes,
yeah, thank you.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Finney. And again, we thank all of those of you who joined us today. We will continue these conversations as we further our initiatives and work when it comes to amplifying social field safety issues. Now, real quick to announce the two winners of our anniversary giveaway. Congratulations to JJ Apodica and Sarah Farrer. If you are watching, please check the email you registered with so that we can get you your prizes. Please be sure to follow and interact with Field Inclusive on all of our social media handles, Instagram, Facebook, X, LinkedIn, and YouTube at the handle @Field Inclusive. Please also be sure to visit our website and learn more about our organization and the ways that you as an individual or a group can support us. Remember to also check out our 50% off sale in our store today as a thank you to our supporters. Sale ends today at 11:59 p.m. And with that, we hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you again so much for joining us. And let's give one more round of applause to Dr. Finney. Thank you.